Emma, welcome to the podcast. Really, really good to see you today. Is this your first time in Leeds?
No, not my first time in Leeds. First time on a podcast, though.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll tread carefully and gently. Okay.
Thank you.
But no, it's great to see you. And today we're talking about, it's the crystal ball moment. It's what does the future look like within financial planning, wealth management, and today the focus is on marketing. Gladly, you're the expert in this, so hopefully you can unravel some of the myths and potentially what's happening in the future. But I want to start off by talking about yourself and your journey, because looking at your own profile, and I'll read it out, I come with receipts. Unconventional marketing and strategy leader.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think yours has been the typical journey into marketing. So just let's explore that. How did you get into marketing, and what's your unconventional journey?
Yeah, so it was progressive and accretive for sure. So each role led to the next. But my background is actually, my foundations are in the world of finance. So I did accounting and management at university, and I then did a professional accounting qualification. And I spent the first decade of my career in finance within financial services. So I went through a number of big brands, BNY Mellon, RBS Coutts, Aviva Investors, and all of those roles were within finance. And it was always the more strategic end of finance. It was never statutory tax regulation. It was always business partnering, planning, external market-faced stuff. But that opportunity then led me to the world of strategy. So because it was the strategic end of finance, that made the move to strategy. And I ran corporate strategy for a listed wealth manager for a few years and absolutely loved that role. That was something that gave me great visibility of the organisation, great visibility of the market. I got to work on some really exciting stuff with corporate brokers externally. And that really kind of opened my eyes and the window to the fact that the data that we had within the organisation at that point in time was a bit of a problem. I'd been in big places big organisations where you've got offshore functions, you've got data through gazillions of legacy systems. And my next role, setting up the analytics team, really came as a bit of a separate pet passion project of my own, which was how do we improve the data? And the mantra was simple, let's make it really easy to get it right and really hard to get it wrong. And the way that you interact with the data, let's democratize it, and let's make sure that you, it's intuitive. So as you take your iPhone out of the box, you don't look for the instruction manual. You literally know how it works. And that's how I wanted the data visualization to be. So I built the commercial analytics team from scratch. That was a really exciting time. Brought new people in, people from outside of the world of wealth as well, which was really exciting. We brought Tableau Server in, and obviously, one of my main clients whilst I was in that role was the marketing team, because at that point in time, we had all of this brilliant insight, both from our internal data, the pot of gold under our feet, and also external client and market sentiment that we were able to connect. So heavily influencing the go-to-market strategy at that point. And I should say it was probably a 7-year run-up into marketing, actually, because whilst I was running strategy, I rewrote the distribution strategy for the firm as well. So heavily worked with the business development team with BD. So by the time the marketing role came around, it was a bit of a no-brainer that I was going to put my hat in the ring for it. But it's definitely an unconventional route and not a traditional sort of journey of, I didn't grow up through the world of digital marketing or brand marketing in isolation.
That's really interesting. So what would you say were the key learning points over the last couple of years that sort of really helped you in your position as a marketing leader?
I think the ability to look at things in a different way, to bring a unique and distinct and different perspective to, it does mean that you constantly challenge that status quo, because you're seeing things for the first time. You're not seeing things and just going through the motions. You're seeing them and you're questioning them and you're learning and understanding. So I think that's sort of really key, is bringing that diverse and different perspective.
And what was it like managing a marketing team? Because I would expect them to be quite creative, quite fun. Am I on the money there? Or
Yeah, absolutely. The team, I had an exceptional team at Charles Stanley. They really were the very, very best at what they did. I had brilliant subject matter experts, brilliant attitudes, growth mindsets. It was a really fun time.
Yeah. And how big was the team?
30 people in total.
Wow. What was the sort of the opportunity at Charles Stanley? What were you trying to do there? What was the mission?
There'd been a number of business exits, business sales, or areas of the firm that had been being held for sale and then were sold off. The divisions had been restructured from a front office perspective internally, and the marketing team hadn't really kept pace with that. So, and the marketing team had grown and evolved. So, the team when I very first joined Charles Stanley back in 2012 really was a core events team at that point in time. So the whole concept of strategy and client marketing, digital marketing and brand and creative was a little bit absent in the beginning. And then the growth of the D2C platform, Charles Stanley Direct, again, making sure that we had the digital capabilities, the performance marketing outlined to support that. It's a very distinct and different discipline to supporting the high net worth business.
And what would you say has been the biggest challenge for you?
Ooh, biggest challenge. I genuinely think it's probably buy-in as a sort of overarching piece, and I can break that down into a few different areas. So, for example, you've got 250 investment managers and 50 financial planners, and the objective is to mobilise that force to go out and to be able to get them to retain business and to drive new business. And ideally, you want them leveraging as much as they are able to the marketing activity that you're putting in place for them, because the campaigns were national and strategic in nature. Of course, within that population of 300, you definitely had everything on the spectrum, from those that were your media-trained media commentators, those that were regularly doing video content for their clients, those that would engage with online LinkedIn activity, those that would present on panels for you, those that would offer case studies if you were writing a campaign or an award submission, those that would provide media comment if a journalist got in touch, the ones that would utilise your central resources, etc., those that 100% fundamentally got the support that they could leverage from the marketing team. And then all the way at the other end, you had individuals who would say, the vast majority of my business comes via referral. I don't need a marketing team full stop, let alone support of brand. I don't even need a brand. So everything that sort of sits in, and everyone was at some point
That's
on
diverse.
that spectrum.
That's a big group of people there.
It is. And I think, one of the key ways to attack that challenge was something, and that was something that we approached earlier this year, was I'm going to call it a bit of a marketing love bomb. It was basically a series of road shows.
Tell me that. I like that.
Yeah, let's go with that.
You are in marketing. I love that.
That's it. There we go.
Yeah.
Do you like telling a story?
Yeah. Okay.
And the objective of it really was to look at everybody that was on that scale of those that are disengaged and those that are really engaged. And if you could just move those that were perhaps a little less involved with the marketing team up a few notches, you're going to be getting more from your activity. So it was really just to remind people, what are the campaigns we have running? What's the thought leadership? What are the events that you can participate in? And doing it at a level that felt comfortable and accessible for people, because not everybody feels comfortable posting online. Not everybody feels comfortable going on video or going on television or doing podcasts. So, you've got to work with what you've got. So almost applying that marketing segmentation perspective that you would ordinarily reserve for your client and your target segments and the external market, applying that to our internal force of investment managers and financial planners was really powerful for getting that buy-in.
And how did it sort of pan out in the end with regards to the buy-in? Did you get people moving up the scale?
Definitely. And more awareness, visibility, understanding. I think it was really just making sure that people felt included and knew and understood how they could access and where they could go. We created something on the intranet which was really the home of everything that they were going to need. So it was really just signposting that as well and saying, we're here to talk to you about all of these things that you can participate in. But P.S., it's always here. You don't need to wait for us to come and tell you. This is where it is. And what we did as well is we asked for marketing champions to sit within each of the offices, because, I absolutely know and understand that the life of an investment manager or financial planner is incredibly pressed for time. So you're not just managing client relationships, you're rebalancing portfolios. You have got suitability reviews, you've got client reviews, you're conducting meetings. The concept of business development and leveraging marketing activity, it is probably point number 10 on a list of 10 things for some people. So in order to help them, and it was really to make their lives as easy as possible, that was really how we started to create that buy-in, was to explain what it was, how you access it, how you can utilise it, how it will benefit you. We had a few testimonials from those that are using it on a regular basis, and that really helped. Basically just trying to make it as simple as you could.
I can imagine it being quite difficult, because I think sometimes even in the world of financial planning, asset management, sales is a dirty word. And then you attach marketing to it. And I can see where people will say, well, this is how I do my business. It's all through referrals. So I can imagine it being quite a challenge to get people on this journey. And there's an age demographic as well. There's some. It's an aging market in some ways.
Demographic time bomb for sure.
Yeah, another time bomb. But what would you say at Charles Stanley was your greatest achievement whilst you were there?
Ooh. Goodness. Across my entire career or just within the world of marketing?
Let's do both. Why not?
Okay, so I would probably say the creation and buy-in of the commercial analytics function. That was something that was a bit of a leap of faith for the Exco at that point in time as well, because we didn't have this team and there was a lot of questions around why do we need it. But at the point that I left, it was commercial analytics plus. It became a hub and a home for all things commercial, frankly.
Was it all things data orientated as well? Were you just looking at all the data points? And if you were, what were you looking to get from that data?
So a lot of it was about the connectivity of data. And that's something that I think will have set them up really, really well for the future. I think as AI becomes far more prolific and used a lot more, how you have your data structured, the ontology, the connectivity of your data, I think is going to become more and more important and prevalent. And they've got a really sound base because that already exists. But it's not just about the data. It's about insight and action that you take from that data. So it's about connecting the right pieces, tracking the right things, measuring the right things, understanding the things that you need to measure, and then knowing what you do with that.
So you went to the Exco, you got the approval.
I did.
You said this is the way to go forward.
Yeah.
So that's a career highlight. And what about if you look at in the sort of pure marketing perspective, what would you say your biggest achievement to date is?
Yeah. I think probably the last campaign that was still running. Well, there's a couple actually. I was really proud of the Harlequins rugby partnership and signing the National Theatre. So in terms of the partnership space, that was a particular highlight because the thread of player welfare and financial well-being that we wove together over the course of the 6 years that we had that partnership was really fantastic. That was a great way to tell stories. It was a great way to engage at every stage of the funnel with a client. So everything from the awareness piece through engagement, impact, and ultimately into acquisition. So it was that was a really key partnership for us, and that worked really well. But the thing that I did absolutely adore from a pure sort of campaign, pure play marketing perspective was the work that we did aimed at business owners and entrepreneurs. So the campaign overall was called Fortune Favours, for sort of Fortune Favours the Brave. And we split that up into a number of different themes. And it ran through everything from business exits and succession into Phoenix founders, so those that have founded the business, it's failed, and then they founded something else. Opportunities and adversity, so that was around businesses that have been set up through adverse conditions, market crashes, global pandemics, etc. Then the final campaign that was running when I left, that launched in conjunction with International Women's Day earlier this year, was female founders. And that was particularly interesting because that was talking about the world of business owners and entrepreneurs through the lens of female investment. And, the way that the world is going, the proportion of wealth that will be held by women over the course of the next few years is staggering. And yet, as a part of the demographic, they are typically underserved by the world of wealth. So that was a really interesting piece. But each of these themes had panel discussions to go along with them. They had thought leadership pieces. We partnered with some brilliant organisations like Bowhurst and the Entrepreneurs Network. Yeah. We used our paid media. So we used the Times initially, and then we moved that over to the Telegraph as well. And we ran brilliant events. We had brilliant hosts. We had brilliant speakers. We had brilliant panellists. So it really was an overarching campaign that you could see. We were building ahead of steam. We were building credibility and subject matter expertise consistently in a space, because that's really what you need to do. It goes back to, creating consistent brand moments and being a consistent voice that your clients can, and future clients can recognise you for, is absolutely essential. Because if you pop up at the point of sale for a business owner or entrepreneur when they're at the point where they're selling their business and say, "Hi, I'm from Charles Stanley, can I help you?" The answer at that point probably is
no. Relationship.
Exactly. I needed to be on that journey with you, and
absolutely.
I need you to understand my challenges and the other professional advisors that I work with. So that was something that was really well thought through. It partnered really well with the business development team alongside the marketing team. It was every single aspect of it was really top notch.
So, and if I was on the Exco, I would be saying, that's great. And then what about the ROI? How did that work out? So if you look at the numbers, it's all really good, great, everything, really nice vision. Did it work out from an ROI? Can you measure it? Because I always find this interesting, and we'll get into this about when it comes to marketing, the ability to measure the achievements of what marketing does.
Yeah.
But I was listening to Rory Sutherland a few weeks ago, and he always said sometimes we obsess too much
100%.
Over the metrics. We literally spend so much time just going through the numbers without actually looking ahead in terms of how are people feeling towards the brand or the communication.
Yeah.
But going back to what you were doing, how did you sort of justify there was an ROI or even that it was actually working?
Yeah. Well, it's always far easier to... This is actually one of Rory's quotes. It's always far easier to post-rationalise something than it is to pre-rationalise. So to some intents and purposes, you've just got to get on with it. You've got to come up with your ideas and you've got to get out there and you've got to do it because your competitors are in market. They are visible. They are creating awareness with your potential client base. You need to be visible externally. So to some intents and purposes, you just have to do it. That whole piece around overall tracking and ROI, in a world of wealth management where basically it's trust and advice. That's what you're selling, as it were. That's what you represent. That's the service you're able to provide to clients. That is a lot harder to measure because you do have a very long lead time for that stuff. It's not going to be something that happens overnight, and you might have many, many touch points with that client. So in terms of the overall tracking, yes, you can track the individual campaign metrics associated with that. So that would range everything from engagement with thought leadership that you're putting out online. That would be event attendance, event acceptances. There's lots that you could do to say, great, is this hitting the kind of metrics that we want it to do? But ultimately, you want to be able to say, we have won a new client from this, or we have expanded our involvement with an existing client, and here's what that means to the P&L and the bottom line. And I think that's where it becomes quite tricky, because can you credit it to that one singular piece of interaction? Or in actual fact, was it the fact that you invited them to an event 2 months ago, 3 months ago, that you had them sign up to your weekly communications, you had a few other touch points as well. So I think whilst you can track specific campaign metrics and deliver ROI off the back of that, the bit that often is a lot harder to connect and to join the dots was, what about all of that other subliminal effort that has fed into that is, unless you've got a perfect MarTech stack, you're not going to be able to track.
No, I understand that, and I think that's a very fair point. And was it the women founders, women entrepreneurs? How did you go about doing that and targeting that market? Because they are underserved and underrepresented, I should say. So how did you go about sort of identifying that market, that audience?
So I think the world of wealth and women with wealth and women in investing, whether it's the investment gap, the salary gap, the pension gap, there is a gap between women and men fundamentally. And in terms of where that is driven from and where that actually starts, it's pretty young, and it's around confidence. It's around confidence in earnings, confidence in ability. And, typically on average, women are better savers, but they don't invest as much. And there's a brilliant campaign out at the moment that I've seen that's it's got a picture of a panda and a picture of a pile of money, and it said, left to their own devices, neither will reproduce.
Yeah,
it's,
that's quite clear.
Yeah, it's a quilted one. It's brilliant, actually. And it's that whole piece around, you can save money, but unless you're investing it, it's not going to go anywhere. And, typically the sentiment from a lot of women is, I've taken a long time to build this wealth and to make these savings and to earn this money, and I'm now more terrified to lose it by screwing it up. So in terms of building that confidence, giving that education, getting it in at the right time, I think that is absolutely key. And so carving out an area of the campaign that we were looking at to focus just for women was really, really important.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to move on to marketing, as in, what is marketing? All right. Okay. Because when we had a conversation a few weeks ago, and I've used this, and you should really copyright this.
Which bit?
Well, I quite like the love bomb. Yeah. We were talking about...
you can have the love bomb for free.
Yeah, I'm going to take that one. Don't worry. That's going to be a thumbnail. We were talking about marketing, and it was almost a comment that you made about it's not the colouring in department.
Yeah.
And I have continued to use that
Yeah.
as well. And I think that resonates with a lot of marketeers as well, that it's not just the font department, it's not just colouring. And as you've mentioned, it's a lot more detailed. And if you could start plugging data in as well to really start to inform your actions and the audience that you're trying to hit, then it's very powerful. But I've always asked this question, and let's get back to the basics. So in your opinion, what is marketing?
So for me, this one is crystal clear, and it really is very simple. It is the voice of the client at the table. It is making sure that you're able to connect client needs, wants, desires, attitudes, behaviours, all of that stuff, connecting that with business outcomes. So taking that and saying, great, this is what the market is telling us that they want, that they need, that they desire, and where they need support. And how do we serve them with that? How do we help them with that? So fundamentally, it is all about the voice of the client.
So it's about the client voice then.
Yeah.
It's being heard. So how do we ensure that we're listening? And how do we ensure that we're listening to the right message from the client?
Mm-hmm. So I think you've got to be incredibly open. So some of the things that we did in taking direct client feedback, yes, you can pull out themes, and yes, you shouldn't get too fixated on one single point or one single area. But I think it's absolutely key that you listen to what is the sentiment, what's the mood music, and how do you help. So right now, whilst we've got a budget coming up, there are quite tumultuous times on the cards, quite possibly. You need to be reassuring, you need to be supportive, you need to be calm, you need to be competent. That confidence gap that exists in terms of trust in markets, frankly, that is something where you need to be that reassuring piece. So it's taking those pieces of feedback from the client, going, right, okay, so how does this now show up through the activity that we're doing and the communications that we're providing to clients, and how we're supporting our front office teams, who are the ones who will ultimately be interacting with those clients.
So if you look at it from the lens of where we are today, what are the problems that you think marketing is trying to solve at the moment?
In terms of the problems, I mean, there's probably quite a few, frankly. So lots of firms will position themselves as being relationship-led and being trusted advisors and operating on said trust. But do you actually walk the walk, or are you just talking the talk? So in terms of how you actually show up when you're talking to your clients versus what you've said you're going to do. So, do you have an operating model that supports that? Do you have a client experience that supports that? Do you have internally incentive structures aligned to supporting that? I think there's a lot to be said for, what is the problem that marketing's trying to solve? Well, marketing often amplifies what you have internally. And if what you have internally isn't the right setup and isn't the right fit, you're not going to be amplifying the right kind of messaging and the right kind of approach to your clients. So I think you've got to be really, goes to an authenticity point, really. You've really got to be owning who you are, who you can help, what you do, and then making sure that you're broadcasting that.
That's really interesting. So how do you go about building trust then? Because we live in a world where, sometimes I'm online, I have no idea if what I'm watching is actually truthful or not. You just don't know. And we've got the world of AI and what they're doing with all the images, and some of them can be very funny to watch, actually. But it's also very scary to see how it could be easily manipulated. But from a consumer perspective, in the world of wealth management, where, the relationship with money, for some people, it can be quite, strange in a way. And there's a lot of distrust anyway when it comes to money. So how do you go about building trust with people in the wealth management space?
Yeah, I think this sort of touches back on that being authentic point, who you are, who you can help, and what you can do. But in terms of building trust, I think it takes time, right? You can build trust over days, weeks, months, years, and it can be lost overnight by sometimes elements beyond your control. So I think you've got to be patient and you've got to be consistent with that, because you've got to demonstrate that you are there for clients when they need you as well. At the end of the day, it's a people business, people by people, and you are more often than not dealing with clients who are seeking advice because they're going through very difficult situations. Whether that is the reason that they are looking for some advice on investment is because they've inherited some money. That means a parent has passed away, or the reason they have some money to invest is because they've just got divorced, or they're going through a divorce. Often it's understanding the human that sits behind that money. Yes, ultimately you want to do the best job for the client, but you build the trust by showing up in all of those moments and by building the relationship. And that was something that I know all of those who were running client relationships and client money were exceptionally proud of the levels of trust that their clients had in them.
So you must be getting a lot of feedback from those guys, client facing. And was there any particular moment that you heard some advice or somebody mentioned to you and you thought, yeah, that's what we need to start focusing on? Did it really start to change the way that you looked at marketing in terms of from what was actually being said from at the ground level, at client level?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, I think, knowing and understanding that, yes, as a marketing division, you have work to do, you have money that needs to be invested, you need to be supporting your brand, you need to be making sure that your performance marketing is hitting where it needs to be. I think ensuring that you've got that client feedback and those real difficult human moments embedded into what you're doing is absolutely key and essential. So whether that's providing case studies, whether that's providing any sort of description, or, it's telling the story really. Here's how we've helped people through situations like this. That's where I think it becomes really key, because people are not unique in those situations. We're all going to die one day. There are some things that are going to happen to everyone. So
it's a nice thought, Emma.
There we go. Cheery and uplifting, isn't it?
Audience numbers just drop now.
Yeah. But that whole piece around, how do you manage for IHT? How do you manage an inheritance when you receive it? Those are often difficult topics to get started on. Nobody really likes talking about those. But in terms of ensuring that your activity and the way that you're positioning yourself and your firm, it puts you in that trusted advisor position, and that allows people to feel that they're able to open up about those conversations. That's where the real value is.
So you've talked about case studies as being a really good sort of mechanism in the marketing world. I was having a conversation with somebody on Tuesday, and we were talking about the inertia of people to take action.
Analysis paralysis.
Yeah. And it was the ability they know they should take advice, but almost they don't do it for whatever reason. There's a drop-off on the sort of the process that he was showing me. There was a drop-off between the sort of the conversation bit, the questionnaire, and then another questionnaire. There was almost like it became too troublesome. Yeah. So from a marketing perspective, he talked about visualization as being a key. What are your thoughts about visualization, making it easy for a client to see potentially what their future could look like rather than just perhaps words on a website?
Yeah, I think that's goes back to the storytelling point, doesn't it? It's the, fundamentally, the core thing that you need to understand from your clients is what sort of future do they want to have? What are their goals? What are their aspirations? What's important to them? What are the things that they want to invest in? And what are the things that actually don't matter so much? And I think once you really get to the nub of that piece of visualization around, really tangible things. When is it you think you're going to retire? When do you want to retire? Do you want to support your children in buying their first homes? Where are you at in your life? And what is it that you want from your future? I think that visualization piece and that storytelling, and that is where I think, those who manage client relationships are really, really good at getting that visualization built up in people's minds around, right, okay, if that's what I want to happen, you've got to work back from that, and understand there's a chain of events. And I think it's absolutely key.
And marketing has moved on over the years. Is there anything that you would say that we shouldn't be doing now? If you're a business owner or marketing expert, is there an area that is sort of, it's past its sell-by date?
Not necessarily past sell-by date. I think probably the way I'm going to approach thinking about this is that trends come and go. Things come and go. So there is a seismic shift currently. So, the world of SEO, the world of optimization for that versus GEO, where the world is moving. So LLMs basically giving people answers rather than options.
What's GEO?
Generative engine optimization. So it's for AI, basically, instead of search engine optimization. So instead of optimizing Google, optimizing for a chat or a Claude or other AI platforms are available.
That's interesting. I'll just touch on that because somebody said that where SEO used to be where you needed to be, you needed to be on page number 1 of Google.
Yeah.
Is it right now that that's perhaps not so important and it's more where you are from an AI perspective? So it's almost if someone was to research my company, it'll just come up with BWD are arguably the best recruitment firm in the world, whatever it may be.
Good plug.
Yeah. and that'll be it. But they're not going to be searching page 2. It's almost like you need to be on there because of all the assets that you share and all of the marketing material. Is that where the market is going?
So obviously you wanted to be at the top of that, or you, from a sort of an organic perspective, or you wanted to be on the you paying for the sponsor piece of it. I think I actually attended a really good event that was run by an agency called Incubator, and it was over at Google's offices, and I heard from the head of search at Google. So who better to hear an opinion on SEO versus GEO? And he was actually a really, really eloquent speaker. And his view, you might have noticed that as you go on Google now, a little section pops up, which is the AI overview. So yes, you still get your search results, but they are embedding that AI overview that sits on the top of it that says, well, here are all of the things that you've looked for, but here's the AI overview that's part of it. So his perspective on this was that search is not going to go away, but it's going to evolve and it will look slightly different. And that for me was really interesting. So it's not that things go, your initial question was, do things go in favour or out of favour, or, where should you be focusing? And I think depending on, for any brand or for any business, where you are in your investment cycle, your stage of growth, your future aspirations, there's always going to be a balance between how much you're investing on the brand side of things versus the performance side of things. And at certain stages of that, you're going to need to dial one up versus the other, and then depending on your budget, dial one back. I think the absolute key piece to remember through all of it is that you can't focus on one to the detriment of the other. So you cannot, if you take away all of your investment in brand, you cannot performance market your way out of a brand problem if you then subsequently have issues surrounding your brand. So it's all about striking that balance between where you're dedicating your efforts. So it's not necessarily to say, here's what you absolutely should be doing and here's what you should not be doing. You've got to look at it holistically and say, here's everything that we need to be doing. How do we create the right balance within that?
Yeah, I understand that. And I think I was asking that question because the advice, well, there is it's an aging demographic anyway, and there's still the belief of sending newsletters.
Yeah. And
I think that is still of value, certainly at budget time as well. I think that's when people really need advice, because that's when you're going to get the phone calls. But that seems to be when I've spoken to owners before, we do marketing, we do a newsletter. Yeah. And I think there's more to marketing than that. I've always
tiny bit, yeah.
I've always viewed marketing, and Danny will watch this, and I always talk about this. Danny's in my business; she does marketing. It's almost like marketing is just the term; it's the cake. But within the cake, there's all the ingredients that make up marketing. Yeah. From your advertising to obviously doing the events that you were talking about earlier on. There's a combination of things that power marketing. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
100%. Glad. Yeah, and I feel like Danny is going to feel validated listening to this and seen and represented and heard, because
She's certainly heard.
Good. I do often think that the misunderstanding or the misconception that it's easy and that you end up with an army of sort of armchair marketeers, of people with opinions and different ideas and saying, it is just a newsletter, or it is just this. It's that word "just" that goes in front of everything. Really, actually, there is a lot of complexity to it, and there is a lot of balance, and there is a lot of thought process that goes into balancing those various different ingredients of the cake. So I think you do need to make sure that you have the right people doing the right things at the right time.
So I'm going to ask you this question, and then we can refine it just to make sure that it works. But if you were starting a marketing function, if you went into a business and you started a marketing function, what would be the must-haves? This is what you must have to elevate your brand, to do all your case studies. I'm just looking at it from a from an owner's perspective, I'm looking at my business and thinking, what do I really need to have? Because things are changing out there. There's a world of AI, which we'll come on to. But here and now, for the next couple of years, what do I need to have in my business from a marketing perspective? Mm-hmm. That's a broad question.
It is. And I think the answer to that will vary wildly depending on which industry, specifically within each industry, which types of firms you're looking at, as I said before, the stage of growth, the size of the organisation, the appetite. But if I just leverage my own experience from a UK wealth manager, you must have your North Star. You must have your strategy. You must know where you're going, and it must be really, really clear where you're going. So that whole piece around strategy and the client marketing side of it, that needs to be core and fundamental and sitting at the centre of the universe of your marketing division, frankly, because that is the area that connects external market and client sentiment, understands the strategy of the business and where we're going, and then ultimately is the one that can then operationalize and say, great, so what are we doing off the back of that? So for me, you're sort of, the very beginning is your strategy. That's where you absolutely have to start.
Yeah.
And depending on the type of firm you are, you might have B2B, you might have B2C, you might have B2B2C, you might have client insight capabilities. It depends how large the organization is and what sort of support you need. But fundamentally, that would be the team that does a lot of that thinking and connecting external market requirements and sentiment with what is the proposition that we have and how can we connect those two things together. So strategy is central for me. The team that I was leading before had quite a big presence in the space of digital. So we had a D2C platform, and in terms of running that and supporting that was a distinct and unique and different skill set to supporting a high net worth private client. So that was an area within digital that had additional focus. You've obviously got your social media, your performance marketing that would go alongside that. You've got management of your website, you've got your e-com. So digital is an incredibly AI these days is a broad church, but you do need specific focus, because whilst wealth management is a people business and people by people, the chances are there will have been multiple online interactions before the point that you've spoken to a human being if you're coming for the first time. So digital presence is really big. Brand is another area that you separately, I would counsel having investment in. I think brand should not be underestimated, and the importance of investing in your brand and ensuring that you have brand consistency. And
what do you mean by brand? Because I've had marketeers come in and they go, it's all about your brand. And I'm like, we're a small business. We're not going to be Coca-Cola or anything like that. But I guess my frustration has been when they talk about brand, it becomes they would use an example in their pitch about much larger firms.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's not us.
That's not us, yeah.
Yeah, so how...
We're not Coca-Cola.
No, we're not, no. So I always think I'm not getting it.
And
I think sometimes a brand, when I look at my company, the brand is it's my vision, it's my strategy, it's my beliefs, because that's the core that then resonates with, hopefully, my colleagues, and that should then follow through.
Yeah.
So when you talk about brand, what does it mean to you?
So to me, it's your promise to your current clients and your potential clients. It's what people say about your organisation when you're not in the room. So that it's that piece that sort of is intangible, but it is intrinsic to how people view you and what people think of you. And in terms of tangibly, then how do you actually support that? Within my brand team, I had that structured into content as one core strand, and then design and creative for another. So the content piece is, how do you speak to people? Where are you showing up? What is it you're saying? Is it something that people can easily understand? Do they know what you stand for? And of course, your brand is, you could look at that also from an internal perspective. You've got both your internal side of your brand plus the external side of your brand. And, who is it you are working to? Are you where are your values? What's your mission? What do you stand for? It's making sure that comes through in your marketing activity. So having people who are separately thinking about that and evolving that and shaping that and making sure that there is consistency and that it is where it needs to be, that's absolutely fundamental.
Yeah. I wish the people that came into my business had a bit more of an understanding of that then, rather than just the esoteric, we want you to be like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or whatever it is. It's just not going to work.
And then the other area I would say, so for me, the partnership space was a core way that you could interact with and create moments with your clients and potential clients. So there was a sponsorship, partnership and events team that used to be part of my remit too, and fantastic team running close to 200 events per year across partnership activity, campaign activity, and local office activity as well. And that was everything from 600 people in-person events through to roadshows, seminars, online. It was absolutely everything.
Was that the Future Favours events? Would that be in the partnerships, or is that something?
Fortune Favours, yes.
It's a Fortune Favours.
Fortune Favours, yeah. So with Fortune Favours, for example, there were a series of events that would be run in partnership with paid media, so in partnership with the Times or the Telegraph. We worked with the Spectator and the Oldie as well. So brilliant venues, brilliant partnerships alongside the media side, alongside the campaign piece as well, just to really bring everything to life. And it's, I think, the way that the world has moved post-pandemic, I think people are a lot more choosy with their time about what they attend these days. So I think if you are going to get people to an event in person, you need a really, really fantastic venue or a real hook or a really knock your socks off set of research or a spectacular panel that are going to be speaking. You need to make sure that the working week has been truncated into Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays for actually getting people to things in person. It's rarely that you'll see something held on a Monday or a Friday. And
has this changed because of COVID?
Yeah, definitely. And
what have you seen in terms of the change?
Yeah, so it is about people being more choosy with their time. I think we all spent so long cooped up at home back in the times of, bubbles of six and hands, face, space and all of that stuff. We've got PTSD over.
It's 5 years now, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think we've all got PTSD from it. But I think,
hands, face, I remember that one.
Yeah.
That's what you tell our kids, isn't it?
Exactly. But that's something, the world has returned post-pandemic, but it has certainly not returned to what it was. So I think, we went from a world of lots of our interactivity with our clients was in person when it came to the space of events or partnership. All of that went overnight. So you had to think differently about how do you position client interaction and how does that work? So everything went online. And now we're back into a hybrid world of actually online is this hybrid version of online. It is really convenient for some people if you then say, we're able to do this online. But nothing beats the human connection. Nothing beats sitting down with someone and speaking face to face with them. That's the reason I've come up here in person today. I thought this would be a lot more fun if we could sit and talk with one another. And it's that piece of gelling with someone, creating a connection. And I think, whilst we're seeing the return of that in-person piece, there's definitely space for both. And it's creating that right balance between the two so that you're getting the right level of in-person human interaction and the right level of ease of delivering online when it's needed.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the human connection piece is, with the way that AI is going in regards to our own businesses, where it's looking at the tasks which are repeatable, which can be done, if it reduces the time, which allows you to spend more time doing the things that you enjoy, then really they should be spent in terms of being client focused.
Yes.
Sitting in front of your client and building that relationship. So with these events that you put on, what would you say are the one or two things must have for a person to really get value from a client perspective, value from the event, and also from a company promoting that? What would you say are the fundamentals? Because you mentioned panel, you mentioned speaker. Are they the main things, or is there anything else that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the audience. So knowing and understanding what is the ultimate outcome that you're looking to achieve from said event. So is the event for retention? So it's for existing clients, and it's something where you can say, great, this is a thank you for the last year, however many years of being with us. and it's normally something pretty high end and it's rather lovely, or is this a prospecting event where these people are not yet clients and you want to be demonstrating some level of thought leadership to them? You know, is it an audience that where you've actually got an education piece that you can put in front of them? Is that what you're looking to achieve? So I think knowing and understanding who you're looking to target and what it is they're going to do, or indeed, you know, from a B2B perspective, is it a set of professional introducers? Is it solicitors and accountants that you're working with? Or is it IFAs? You know, if you're hosting an event for them, the shape of that and the way the content that you will put into that will look very, very different to if you were hosting a retention event for existing clients. So I think you've got to be really, really clear on who you're trying to talk to, what you're trying to say to them, and what you want to achieve from it. And then it sort of falls off the back of that, really.
Yeah. And then it flows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there anything else from a marketing perspective that a business should be doing? Because we've gone through 3 or 4 items and we ended up at partnerships. Is there anything else that a future fit business should be looking at from a marketing perspective?
So it would be remiss of me not to say a really decent approach to the world of AI. This is a seismic shift for everybody, not just the world of marketing. And in terms of ensuring that you are future fit for that world, what that world looks like, I do still fundamentally believe that you need your building blocks. You need a really decent strategy. You need your North Star. You need everything humming before you put AI on top of it, because AI will help you to amplify what you've got. So to the points you were just making around making things simpler, you know, taking away some of the stuff that takes up the time that you don't want to do to allow you to do the things that you do want to do. If you're operationalizing and taking away some of that lower level or repetitive type work, that allows you time for the creativity, for the thinking, for the human brain side of it, where you need the sort of EQ coming in. You need to be actually thinking about how it's going to resonate with clients. So I think the firms that are thinking really decently about how AI is integrated into their marketing functions in a really thoughtful way and in a sustainable way. You know, it's a highly regulated industry. So in terms of, you know, do you run at something, it doesn't work, it fails, and then you have to start again? You know, thinking about being thoughtful around the strategy that you're going to have to AI adoption in your firm, I think is something that I would be thinking about in a lot of detail.
Are you optimistic about the future?
Definitely.
Are you? Good.
I'm a glass half full person.
Because I think, you know, I listen to various different podcasts and they talk about AI and they talk about the jobs that it's going to replace.
Yeah.
And invariably, marketing is probably one of the first ones it comes up with, the creative side, the copywriting.
Yeah.
And you talk about an AI strategy and the adoption of that, but yeah, how do you think this is going to play out? Because this is the bit that I start to worry about, because I use AI every day. Yeah, doom loop, doom scroll. I need a love bomb. And I just think, and I worry for my own kids as well, like, you know, the jobs that we used to do when we were younger and they're being taken away. And I'm looking at AI and I'm looking at how quick it can be very creative, and it can be in your tone, and it can start to not only do that, but start to plan events and start to be part of the workflow. So I do worry about how that's going to impact the people side. But you've been on a few talks, haven't you, where it's a bit more optimistic. So
yeah,
share some of that optimism.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's, you know, you can't attend an event, a round table, a panel, have a conversation without AI being prevalent in that or coming up at some stage. So it is definitely, you know, there's a lot of buzz around what it is going to mean for the future. And I think there are 2 schools of thought here. One of them is the doom loop of it's going to replace everybody's jobs and the future is bleak and everything's disastrous. And then there's the slightly more optimistic side of it, which is around how cleverly adopted and thoughtfully implemented, it can actually be a real enhancer for brands and a real enhancer for marketing teams. So I think if you go from that perspective, you know, I attended something fantastic, which was called Agentic AI and Wealth. And that was a really, really fantastic talk. And it was about how, you know, we've said, you know, data is, you know, your sort of gold dust, data is king, data is where everything is. In the future, it's metadata. And the ontology and connectivity of the information that you've got and how you're using that cleverly to personalize and to work with your clients. That's something that I think is something to be hugely optimistic about, because there's opportunity. You could look at that and say, we've got an opportunity now to do an even better job than we've been able to do in the past. And that's powered by AI. It's not in spite of it, it's powered by it. So I think you've got cause for optimism. But I do agree, obviously, absent of crystal ball and knowing what the future looks like, you mentioned, the futures for your children. And, I think of the same. My daughter, my youngest, actually just started school in September. And one of the talks up at the school not long ago, one of the teachers said, we are educating your children for jobs that do not yet exist. And it was that.
Are they really saying that? That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah, it's that sort of, and it's probably quite true, right?
Yeah,
we don't actually really know what's going to happen. But I'm ever the optimist. So I'm going to go with the optimistic. I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
I think those that get it right early on as well will really, really win.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's very easy to get into the doom loop of we're all that's it, we're all redundant.
Yeah,
we're going to be sitting behind and I don't know, eating hemp for the rest of our life. I have no idea. I think the point I was going to say, but this probably then goes back into the ones who adopt a strategy will need to ensure that their data is right, because that is a fundamental problem with a lot of advice businesses, because they've got old data, they've got files, there've been mergers and acquisitions. So would you say that when you talk about strategy and you talk about your vision, you've also got to make sure that your data is right to power pretty much your workflows, your marketing and everything else in your business?
Yeah, I mean, you do need to understand your data, and you do need to have it structured in a way that it is accessible or it is readable for areas that need it. I guess where I would counsel on this, though, is, data is always a thorny topic, and people talk about data layers or data lakes or relational databases they've got that sit beneath things that structure their data. And frankly, I think too many people, and I'm going to steal something from another panel discussion the other day, if you wait until you've got your data perfect, you're never going to start. You've got to start somewhere. So I think this whole thing around, how important is your data and how important is the structure and how important is of how good it is, at some point in time, you've just got to jump in and go, well, this is what we've got. Let's make a start with it. And you can add, refine, enhance, evolve, change that as you go. But you've got to start somewhere. If you wait until you've got everything perfect, you'll never begin.
No, you've just got to crack on.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, just get on with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to explore on the future fit firm before we touch on the human behaviour and trust in the engagement side of things, which we have talked about a little bit, actually, about storytelling, but I'm always interested about that human side. But is there anything else from a future fit firm that we need to be discussing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that we thought we would have a talk about was the blend of creativity and data for ultimately getting the right outcome. And I think my thoughts around that are that it's not one or the other, and that blend needs to be dialed up or dialed down accordingly. Data will get you so far, and data will give you a view of the direction that you potentially should be going in, or it will highlight opportunities to you. But the creativity and the thinking around that then really should be, okay, well, this is giving me a pointer in a direction. It's giving me an inference of where I could potentially go or a decision I could make. But nothing replaces, intuition, gut feel, the instinct that you have. So I think that creativity piece that sits with it, it's, you've got to blend the two. And I think making sure that you are not focused wholly on the world of data or wholly on the world of creativity, making sure that you've got the right connection between those two things is fundamental. And, feeding the two things, the data feeds the creativity comes back towards the data, and making sure that you've got, continuous learning, I think, is really important.
How easy is it to interpret the data? Because I can imagine there's all different data sets anyway. So how can you bring that data to life to actually start the creative process?
So this is where having set up the commercial analytics team was actually a real win. It was absolutely fantastic because we'd already put a lot of structure around that information. So part of democratizing the data was ensuring that everybody had access to the same things and the same answers. And when asking a question, would get the same answer. You weren't getting conflicting or contrarian advice to what somebody else had seen. And I think, it's about making it so, wrapping it almost in a sort of layer to make sure that it is easy to understand.
Working in a regulated world, as you do, Can it be? Can it hinder you as well with the creative side?
Yeah.
Are there times where you've wanted to be a lot more creative? We want to push a narrative. We want to get out there and tell a story, but you're bound by the men and women in grey suits.
I mean, obviously you have the sort of binding principles of clear, fair and not misleading. You have to operate under the regulation of consumer duty. There's an awful lot that you do need to have considered in your activity. Is that to say that you can't create something that is unique and distinct and a bit interesting, dare I say it, fun, a bit exciting? There's definitely a difference between heavily regulated industries and others. So I've taken some time recently and I've attended some brilliant events, and very refreshingly, I've certainly been at some events where I've been talking to marketing peers who are not from regulated industries, and events with topics like be less boring, and knowing and seeing how they think and operate and structure thinking towards a campaign. It definitely is a different lens on creativity to the world of heavily regulation within financial services, for sure. But that's not to say that you can't have any of that. There's still some fun to be had. And I think where you do need to try and be really careful is that every single firm out there is going to say that they are authentic, that their clients trust them, and that they are a trusted position for them. How do you create a cut through in that sea of sameness so that you're not all doing the same thing and talking in the same way? I think that's something that's really fundamental and key.
And how do you do that? Because every wealth manager, every financial planning business will say, we care.
Yeah.
You are, we put the client at the forefront of everything. They'll say everything that everybody else does. Okay, so if I look at it from a consumer perspective, how do you cut through to me that I will go to a particular firm?
Yeah. So
this is a $64,000 question. Everyone's going to listen to this like, right, okay,
we're getting up the stakes now. Yeah. For me, I think it's in terms of creating that cut through and creating that voice and that perception for potential clients. I think in terms of sort of building on the pieces that we've talked before about authenticity and about trust, it is the paradox. Everyone says that they've got it. It really manifests and shows up, though, in your actions and your behaviours. So you can say that you're one thing, but if the way that you're acting is different, that's a contradictory position to be in. So ensuring that you've got the right operational model, ensuring that you know who you are in terms of supporting that, listening to clients, making sure that you are delivering for them what they actually need, not what you have predetermined you think they need or the service that you think they need. I think that's really key, because that is where people start going, gosh, they stand out because they genuinely understand me.
Yeah. And I guess it's about capturing people earlier on as well.
Yeah.
Rather than just at the end of the journey when they've accumulated wealth.
Yeah.
It's been part of that journey at the start.
Yeah, 100%.
So everything needs to feed through them, from what people see on the website to if they're using a digital proposition. It all needs to flow, and it always needs to be looking at what the client or the consumer wants.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
It does. And I think if you want to capture people at the start of their wealth journey, the needs and expectations at that stage are very different. So somebody, say, in their 20s who started putting a bit of money into an ISA wants to chuck it into a stocks and shares ISA and wants to know, what's a fund list of, where's my foundation? Where do I start with this? Advising that person who has probably very limited complexity when it comes to issues around tax or, the CGT side of it, or portfolio constraints, that just doesn't exist at that stage. So as people grow their wealth, and typically that is as people grow older as well, I think that your proposition needs to seamlessly shift to ensure that you're supporting the right outcomes for the clients at the points that they need them, and ensuring that you don't lose people in an advice gap because they are not yet at the levels of complexity or wealth that it requires a fully bespoke proposition or a slightly more in-depth service, but they have got to the point where they are beyond wanting to do it themselves because they are worried they're going to do something wrong. They've built it to a certain level and then they go, gosh, this is getting a bit unwieldy now and I need someone to help me with it. So I think ensuring that you've got consistency through your proposition and can support at the relative journey points, I guess, the stages of life.
I can imagine it'd be quite difficult though, because you've got people at a different stage. You've got people who are a lot younger. You've got people at my age. You've got people who are, post-retirement, and it's still going to be difficult because you need to be able to communicate to all, don't you? And they've all got different.
Your client segmentation is key.
Yeah, because my mum and dad are completely different to me, and my kids are utterly different to me.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really where your understanding of your client and your client segmentation will really come into play. So knowing and understanding, let's just call it a persona, the type of individual that you're talking to and what is relevant to them, what's important to them, what drives them and what motivates them. If you have got a really decent set of client segmentation within the way that you are driving your marketing activity, you are going to make sure that you're serving the right messages through the right channels to the right people, and that you are hosting the right events for the right people. You're everything's going to line up then if you know and understand who it is you're talking to. If you very simply go from a generic perspective and say, we would like to manage high net worth client money, that with people potentially north of £1 million to invest, the answer is okay, but that person might be in their 70s and retired, or that person might be in their 40s and just sold a business, and they've probably got very different priorities in their lives. So I think that segmentation piece is
that's critical,
core.
Isn't it?
It's critical.
Yeah,
it's fundamental. That
yeah.
has to come first, and that helps drive your strategy, which in turn you build your team around that strategy, you build your options, your capability, and then the rest of it sort of flows. It definitely needs to be, in my mind, it needs to be thought about in that order.
Have you ever faced a situation where marketing borders on the manipulation, the propaganda side? Because I've always been interested in terms of where's the dividing line, because obviously you want your clients to do the right thing and to protect themselves, but also I always think about what we've been through as a society recently, and it's like there's a thin line, isn't there, between acting in the best interest of your client and then maybe starting to manipulate people to do things because it benefits the company or a particular brand or the government, whatever. I've always found that where is the dividing line between doing good and maybe doing things which perhaps aren't so good?
Yeah. So
does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And I think, this is where you are grateful to be operating in a heavily regulated industry, because there is regulation in place to ensure that doesn't happen. So there are guardrails that keep you where you need to be, from the world of financial promotions, from the world of understanding what is in the best interest of clients. So there's an awful lot of tick boxes that need to be got through around risk disclaimers, the entire financial promotion approval process that exists. A very good interlinkage between the world of compliance internally and the world of marketing internally is absolutely crucial, because I think if you know and understand how to work that process properly so that you are doing the right things at the right time and you are ensuring that you're compliant, you're not going to go far wrong. So I think that's where we talk about the constraints of operating within a heavily regulated industry. On this angle, for this question, it's actually a very helpful thing to have.
I didn't really think about that. That's really positive. And I guess the flip side to that is when you've got all of these finfluencers, all these people, that's completely unregulated. So would you say that the regulators, whoever they may be, need to do more regulation on these YouTube shorts, get rich quick? Because that's where I think there's a lot of mistrust is actually built from, because these schemes fundamentally never work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, potentially. I think in terms of those who are potentially slightly more susceptible to those in that space, perhaps are those that are lacking the education, the experience. Certainly, it's not something that you see that's prevalent with established investors and those that have had experience with managing money or managing wealth. I mean, does it need more regulation? Undoubtedly, but is it something that is simple to regulate? I'm not sure.
I don't think it is. It's a nightmare.
Yeah,
it can be. As you say, you just get into the doom loop anyway, or you just doom scroll and you see some, and then the algorithm picks it up that you've watched it for more than.
That's it. The algorithm's got you now.
That's it. Yeah.
It's going to serve you a bunch more of the same.
Do you do much about research into the algorithm and how that works? Because we were talking earlier before we started rolling about attention span of 2.5 seconds or 7 seconds, etc. So have you done a bit of research around that, and what's the latest mood music around how quick do you need to grab someone's attention?
Yeah. So I attended a fantastic event on this as we were chatting before we started, and it really was eye-opening. The stat that stuck with me was that it was about 2.5 seconds is what you've got to grab someone's attention before they're onto something else. And this whole concept of has attention just crumbled, and because there are so many competing, vying elements for our attention these days. Is it that we're drawn in so many different directions? Is that what causes some of this analysis paralysis around making decisions? Because everything is just so fast, everything's so fast paced. I think, I don't think attention spans have collapsed. We're perfectly happy to binge series on Netflix or watch movies when we want to. If it's something that is engaging and it's helpful to you, and whether that is entertaining, educational, whatever bucket it falls into, if you are pitching it right, then people are going to show up, or people are going to listen, or people are going to watch, or people are going to read. So I think there is an argument for that, in terms of saying, yes, okay, there is still opportunity to get the right audience and to be able to deliver them the right messages. But it kind of goes back to some of the bits that we were talking about earlier in this chat around investment in performance versus brand, and how much you're dialing up and back each of those. And I think what you really need to think about in that regard is, okay, well, where is my money best spent? Because we are going to have to create, there is a messy middle these days. There's no nice linear funnel that there used to be, where you could track it from the sort of top through to the bottom, from awareness through to engagement, intent, and then ultimately an acquisition. I think that messy middle piece that we need to consider now is there are going to be tens, if not hundreds, of fleeting brand moments, really small touch points that you are potentially going to have with your clients. And how are you showing up consistently within those? And how are you making sure that the right message is landing, and that it's recognizable, and that it's understood? That's the bit that I think is slightly trickier as we get more into this, as you say, doom loop AI world. I think that's something to consider, certainly around socials.
I look at my own attention span, and I do think it's got worse. I really do, yeah.
Yeah.
It's never great anyway.
Yeah.
But I think it has got worse. And my concern is always, if I labour on something, it's got me. And that's not always what I want to be seeing.
Yeah.
And that again does concern me in terms of how much I'm being sort of pushed into a certain area. And I always think it back in terms of, well, if I'm in financial planning, we've got to be careful about this. We've got to make sure that we cut through the noise and build up that trust with clients, so they know that someone's at the end of the phone as well. Because when you're dealing with people's money, I don't think sometimes we realise how important it is, and actually how difficult sometimes it's to get the information you need out of your client in terms of their relationship with money as well. So I think it's I do think it's a very interesting time that we live in.
But I think that's back to the IQ versus EQ point. Your people managing relationships, whether they're investment managers, financial planners, both, I think those individuals, yes, they are highly skilled and incredibly intelligent and qualified, obviously, to invest money and to manage it. So the IQ side is a no-brainer. It's the EQ side of how they build that trust with clients, how they're asking the right questions. And I think, again, I'm going to quote something from something that I heard recently, which was that if you were to ask an AI tool to find out the name of a client's son, it would very simply say, what's the name of your son? But if you were sitting around a kitchen table, you'd gone to visit a client, and that was a piece of information that you wanted to gather, you might say, how's your son getting along at university? Which would ultimately reveal probably the same thing. They would probably say, oh yeah, David's getting along great, or whatever their name
He's
is.
enjoying himself.
Yeah. Well,
Fresh as week.
not quite there. But I think it's that sort of side of it is EQ versus IQ for me. It's making sure that you've got the emotional side of it as well.
Yeah, I agree. And with regards to looking towards the future, where do you think the investment goes in marketing in the future? Is it still across all the platforms, social media, content, newsletters? Is it everything, or is there a particular trend that we need to be watching for?
So I think in terms of, goodness, and again, this one, I'm probably going to caveat this and say this really depends on the organisation, the stage of growth, the size, what their objectives are, what their overarching strategy is, because I don't think there's definitely not going to be a one size fits all. So back to the focus on that flex between brand and between performance marketing, I think that is something that's going to be quite personal to each individual organisation. In terms of where I had repurposed and looked at some of my spend, as I said before, that was really around looking at client experience and outcome measurement. Because I think if you are focused on that client experience piece and knowing and understanding what is making your clients tick, what they really like, that's something that you can bring back into what is the rest of your activity. And the rest of your activity then is going to be optimized off the back of that, because you're listening to the feedback, you're understanding, really at a very granular level, what are their challenges, what are their concerns, what are the things that they like, and then you're bringing that back in. I think that's something that's pretty fundamental.
It really is a process, isn't it? The way that you've explained it. And it isn't just colouring in. It's far more complex than perhaps people realise. Before we move on, is there anything else that you want to explore? Because I'm conscious that, I ask you questions and you sit there thinking, where's he going with this one? But is there anything that you want to explore or sort of mention whilst we've got this conversation going?
Yeah, I mean, I think to the point of the complexity of marketing and the understanding, I think that there is too often a misconception that is held is that it is simple and that anyone can have a go at it and that anyone can do it. And, working with the 30 brilliant individuals that I did, it is fundamentally clear to me that you need to be exceptionally talented and skilled in what it is you're looking to do in that world of marketing, in order to be a success at it, because it really is fiendishly complex and it can often be pretty thankless. There's not necessarily pats on the back and well dones when things go well. If something slips, then it's very visible, because typically everything that you're doing is client facing and it's outward and it's in market. So I think it's often quite thankless because people have the misconception and don't understand the complexity that's gone into something, and then are very quick to judge if there is even, you might have 10 things that go absolutely perfectly, and then there's the 11th is the thing that falls over.
Always one.
That's the thing that everyone wants to talk about. And so, and rightly so, you feed back that learning and you bring it back in again in whatever walk of marketing that is. But I think for me, it really is just that misconception and giving that education. That was something that I think was pretty core and fundamental from my perspective. And when you come into running a division like marketing and it's not where you've grown up, you do ask different questions. You're curious. You approach it in a different way. And you do speak in a different language. You've not been entrenched in that world. So you're not just talking about in acronyms and sort of marketing jargon, which you can get pretty caught up in pretty easily. You're able to translate that for the rest of the business and explain what it actually means and what they actually need to be focused on and doing. And I think, fundamentally that misunderstanding is rooted in the fact that very typically, more often than not, the CMO role does not sit on the exco. It normally sits as part of distribution capability, and you might have a head of distribution, or might be rolled up with BD as well. So in terms of having that advocate and having that voice at that sort of executive table, I think that sort of absence drives a lot of that misunderstanding, and also the ability to articulate eloquently what the marketing activity is doing without we're cutting out the jargon and making sure that you're talking about it out in an outcomes-based way. This is what it means for the business rather than here's what we're going to do. I think that's, for me, fundamental and pretty crucial.
Yeah, I'd like to probe around this, if I may.
Sure.
That's got me interested.
Sure.
Yeah. So, firstly, it made me feel a little bit sorry for people in marketing, actually, because it can be quite a thankless task. I can understand that. I can imagine you need to be very resilient in that as well.
Yeah.
But looking at an organisational structure, and if the CMO is not at the exco level, is that, in your experience in financial services, is that, or in other sectors too? And if so, why is that?
Yeah, I think, again, this one's a really interesting one. If you look as well at the proportion of CMOs that subsequently then go on to be CEOs, it's a far smaller proportion than those who've been in other executive capabilities such as finance or ops or one of the other spaces. So I do think that there is that lack of recognition and existence at that top table is genuinely a real issue. But I think it depends on the organisation and the approach and the maturity and development and understanding of marketing capabilities. So I think those that are a little bit more modern in their approach, those who are a little bit more future focused, will recognise the marketing team as a creative force and a driver of growth, and know and understand that, you know, getting marketing right is not just getting marketing right, it's getting products and services, sales, business development, it's compliance from a financial promotions perspective. The risk team is getting everyone's alignment between knowing and building a sort of a marketing culture within an organisation, rather than saying, you know, very narrowly, that's a marketing problem and you know, marketing need to work on that. It's something that says, no, okay, so how do you create alignment between all of those different capabilities so that everybody knows and understands, you know, how do we leverage the market activity from a BD or sales perspective? How do we support it from a compliance perspective? It's getting all of those parts humming that I think is something that's really key. And those that have got CMOs sitting at the top table, and there are some within financial services for sure, they're the ones who are doing really well because they get it.
Now, that's again really interesting point, and I think you're right, because we've talked about how you can cut through the noise, how you can get look at your clients, the different segments, the different demographics, looking at your data. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
So it's far more than just colouring in, and it should have its own voice as well, and should be heard. Can we just talk?
Hence the love bomb.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you did that. Yeah, you need to do a bit of a roadshow, don't you?
Exactly right. I think you do. I think you just need to sort of pare it right back and just, you know, make sure that you are marketing, making sure that people know how you can help.
And can we just touch on yourself? Because obviously you've been at Charles Stanley. You are now looking for opportunities. And this is a great way to, as you said, you've been attending different events. You've been looking at what's happening in the market. What does the future hold for you, Emma?
Yeah, great question. I'm definitely keeping options open. I've started exploring the thought process of some fractional work. So I've been permanently employed and in full-time roles for my entire career. And this has given me a real opportunity to sit back and say, what do I want to prioritise in my own work-life balance, in my own life? You know, what's really going to actually make me happy? And I love the world of wealth. I love, you know, that whole industry is something that has a very special part of my heart, because I think it's helping clients is something I fundamentally believe in. So I would love to stay in the world of wealth, but I would love to ideally work with potentially a few different organisations. So I've started exploring the concept of fractional work. So rather than going into one firm in one permanent role again, which is something that I've always done, is taking this time to say, could I work with a bank of a few clients? So that could be something that's quite exciting and interesting and different. And I think the way that the world is moving, if you look at the average tenure of a CMO, it's typically less than 2 years. And it's the shortest tenure on a C-suite or a senior leadership level. And that's, you know, so is there such a thing as a permanent job these days? You know, who knows? That's probably quite a profound question, but there's definitely, you know, a different approach, and lots of firms are going on a fractional basis. And I think what I would love to do as well is potentially help organisations that are a bit smaller, a bit less mature in their marketing development, and that might lend itself well to not being a 5-day-a-week resource for them. So I think that those two things are sort of one thing that I'm playing with. The other is I would love to start considering stuff in the space of more broader, the sort of title of commercial, because I do have an unconventional route to marketing. I have definitely, you know, got competence and capabilities throughout strategy, analytics, and I brought that into the world of marketing. And of course, you know, underpinning that, the ultimate foundation is the world of finance. I'm a numbers girl through and through. Yeah. So that bringing all of that together would lend itself really well to a chief commercial officer type of designation. So I'm also exploring some stuff in that space as well.
Well, I think deeply impressive, Emma. I have to say, I've really enjoyed this podcast. I think you've taken me in different directions, and I've come away thinking there's a lot more to this than even my own sort of thought process. Before I ask you my final question, is there anything else that you want to mention that we haven't covered today?
I don't think so. I think we've covered an awful lot of ground here.
I think we have. I do like your 4/5 part plan. I think your strategy and North Star, I think, is fundamental.
Yeah.
And I do think that's where a lot of companies go wrong.
Yeah.
Because they copy.
Yeah.
And then everything else won't resonate from there. So if there's any sort of takeaway from this, I think firstly, getting your strategy and your North Star, getting that right, and who you are as a business, your values has to be on point.
Yeah.
Because then it will flow.
It underpins everything.
Yeah. So that's really good. Okay. I have a final question for you then.
Go for it.
Right. So I'm going to give you a magic wand.
Okay.
Yeah. And this magic wand.
That sounds dangerous.
It's highly regulated. It's been approved by the FCA. We're cool.
Brilliant.
So I'm going to give you a magic wand. And with this magic wand, you have one wish.
Okay.
And you can wish for anything.
Yeah.
What would you wish for and why?
Goodness. What would I wish for and why? I would probably. So this one is sort of supportive of what I have been able to achieve so far in my career, and that is that I have had access to brilliant mentors. I've had access to fantastic opportunities, and I've had the confidence and the or stupidity sometimes, you never know, right? But I've at least had the opportunity to say, do you know what, I am going to go for that. And I think that is not something that is always visible or available to women in industries that are heavily male dominated. And I think if I could have a magic wand, I would love to do something to help support women in the world of wealth. I would love to be able to, wouldn't it be fantastic if the gender pay gap was closing, not widening? Wouldn't it be brilliant if there were more female representation at senior board and executive levels? And I know there are lots of brilliant initiatives in this space to help support women. But fundamentally, the model is still broken for women, and in particular, working mums, something that's very passionate and, I feel very passionately about, and that is very close to my own heart, is that, I often say the juggle is a struggle, and raising 2 young children, holding down a full-time job, not only holding it down, but excelling at it, it can be a very brutal world to be in. So my magic wand would be to make the world of wealth more accessible for professional women.
That's a great answer. Thank you for sharing that.
That's all right.
I have to ask, obviously because I work in recruitment. I mean, I don't see. I've been going for 25 years in this. I know I look a lot older, or a lot younger, depending on your viewpoint. I've seen dramatic changes in the world of financial services. I worked in the pensions world many, many years ago, and I worked in an organisation where there was a typing pool of women, and it was like, there's the typing pool, there's Brenda, give your work to Brenda. That's how it was. I've seen huge changes of how we've adapted, how we've amended. Now we've got better, but I look at it from my perspective. But so is there still is it still hard for women to get into wealth management?
It's certainly, and I mean, if you're not just looking at it from a female perspective, if you're looking at it from any sort of diverse background perspective as well, there are typically, lots of areas that are underrepresented, and that is something that doesn't feel right. And it's not necessarily that it's difficult to get into, but I think there's a lot of bias that is built early on in life and in careers, and letting people know, what are the opportunities and what are open. A terrifying stat that I heard the other day was that less than 3% of development on AI is women. So the bias that is being built into AI by the fact that it is being developed predominantly by men, I think there's a lot to be said for many industries, not just the world of wealth, around ensuring that there's diversity so that you don't get bias within any area, frankly. But I don't think it's necessarily difficult to get into, but I'm not entirely sure that women are necessarily well represented or supported. So I think that's something that...
What can employers do more?
Yeah, so I think it's a lot around, ensuring that you are walking the walk, not just talking the talk, when it comes to your policies around maternity, paternity, shared parental. Like that's obviously something that's quite big for those who have families. I think in terms of knowing and understanding what your client base is going to be and representation within your front office of potentially diverse backgrounds, again, I think that's something that's perhaps underserved as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Again, that flows into our conversation today, doesn't it, about having your North Star, walking the walk as well. It has to follow through with everything.
Yeah.
And not just pretending to say the right things and actually not delivering.
Yeah.
That's really good. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I will continue to do my bit in the recruitment world anyway. But Emma,
you're doing a great job for sure.
We do our best. But you've been a brilliant guest. Thank you very much for sharing all the hints and tips about marketing. And I wish you all the best in the future.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you.